That's also possible.
So I also met Mustafa via Ismail. I think about 5, 6, 7 years ago. So they both organized a conference. It's something around political economy. Is that right, Ismail?
Yeah.
And it happens every year, and the next conference is in December. And they invited me, but I'm going to be with the students in Thailand. And I am in the committee of the conference.
I'll take you first.
But somehow I can't be around. So it's and also Mustafa has been very, very helpful. Last year we went to the university at Beykoz University. We went to their university, and Mustafa and his colleagues, they gave us several lectures on different things, different issues. It's a bit far from here, like Ismail said, about 1 hour. So Mustafa has been very kind, very generous with the university. He's a dean there, he's lecturer, he used to teach in Marmara University, which is not very far from here. It's a wonderful university, but now he's gone somewhere else. So I want to thank Mustafa for accepting our invitation and coming and to teach for you. I'm very grateful. So he will talk, give us a briefing about, some of them I may have covered last week. I gave them a lecture about Turkey, just briefly before we came. So let's just listen to Mustafa, hear what he's got to say, and if you have any questions, please, once you finish, we can have some discussion. Is that okay? Mustafa, the floor is for you. Thank you.
Thank you. I will talk about Korean and Turkish development. I picked this topic mainly because these are two very different countries. In the beginning, Turkey was about 3 times ahead of South Korea in terms of per capita income, and it is now just the opposite. About Koreans about 4 times more GNP than Turkey. I wrote a paper for Turkish studies, and I presented this in Koç University about 2 months ago, so that was easier for me to present such a paper. So I will compare these 2 countries from several perspectives. Assuming that primarily different types and capacities for societies and states explain the variations in economic performance, in this article I examined the institutional foundations of the Turkish and Korean societies. I identified specific aspects that have substantial effects on the 2 countries' developmental outcomes as cohesion and consensus base, legitimacy of the state rulers and consensus building in society, administrative capacity of the state, relative autonomy of the state, and motivation for economic development. These aspects are in one way or another interlinked and related to the application of the rule of law, the type of public sector employment, meritocratic or not, the level, quality and type of education, positivist or religious, fairness of income distribution, land reform, progressiveness of taxation, social expenditures, the level of separation of powers, check and balances, the precariousness of geopolitics and quality of leadership. Let me now give you a few stylized facts. In the mid-20th century, South Korea was nowhere near Turkey in terms of per capita income. The economic differences were overwhelmingly in favor of Turkey. Compared to Korea, Turkey had almost 8 times more land, much richer natural resources, and almost 2.9 times more GNP in 1962. Korea was heavily dependent on foreign assistance then. This situation, however, changed dramatically. Since 1962, the Korean economy has undergone one of the fastest structural transformations ever. South Korea maintained an average annual economic growth of 8.9% for 19 years and expanded the nominal size of the economy more than 100 times in 30 years. The result is that 60 years later, in 2022, Korea ranked as the 10th largest economy in the world, while Turkey ranked 22nd. Table 1 shows a comparison of income distribution in 5 developing countries during the 1994 period. As seen in the table, Korean income distribution was similar to India and Taiwan and was much better than Turkey. It is important to recognize that these 3 countries are also the ones which performed much better than Brazil and Turkey. Let me now briefly review socio-economic history of Turkey. The Turkish Republic was founded on the social and economic legacy of Ottoman Empire. The main task of Atatürk was to establish a modern, Western-oriented community on the ruins of the Ottoman Empire. A few years after founding the Republic, radical changes have been made in the legal system, in education, in script form, and in headdress or clothing. All these reforms were aimed at achieving a separation of state and religion, where religion was subordinated to the authority of the secular state. Adoption of new Turkish alphabet and performing educational reforms for establishing a secular education was particularly important. There were also many social reforms that I will not go into detail. Another colleague will particularly focus on that. What is missing was a proper land reform. I will talk about that later. In this slide, you can see the major changes in economic policy. The development of industry was promoted by strategies such as import substitution and the founding of state enterprises and state banks. Economic reforms included the establishment of many state-owned factories throughout the country. Many of these grew into successful enterprises and were privatized during the latter part of the 20th century. Social and political unrest in the 1970s was largely due to deepening inequalities. After 2 failed IMF programs, the government announced a stabilization and structural adjustment program on January 24, 1980. This program represented a radical transformation of economic policies with far-reaching implications throughout the economy. Policymakers decided to shift the country's development strategy from a domestic focus to an export-oriented focus. With the rise of neoliberalism all over the world, many economies, including Turkey, abolished virtually all restrictions on cross-border capital flows. Publicly owned enterprises privatized and markets deregulated. As a result, financial capital gained great fluidity and a punishment capacity. A development with very important consequences was the opening of the capital account and the full convertibility of international capital movements in August 1989. An unbalanced growth pattern that is heavily dependent on domestic and external debt accumulation and short-term capital inflows became the norm. The end result is inequalities dramatically increased. Another major development is that Turkey signed a customs union agreement with the European Union on January 1st, 1996. As a result, tariffs for EU countries were abolished and all subsidies that the state used to give have been phased out. The customs union agreement in 1996 practically meant opening domestic markets for the EU countries without providing any significant advantage for Turkey. During the AKP era, Turkey's political economy gradually transformed from regulatory neoliberalism to top-down state capitalism based on active participation in the economy through formal and informal mechanisms. On the basis of a personalized network of capital accumulation through public-private partnerships and public procurement. The new model of state capitalism is based on broad privileges granted to powerful business interests closely tied to the hegemonic political party. As a highly opaque mechanism for capital accumulation and wealth creation, public-private partnerships became popular toward the end of the AKP era, totaling US $114 billion between 2009 and 2019, representing 78% of all contracts since 1986. The construction industry has become a major rent extraction area for a new elite loyal to the government. Public-private partnerships have been expanded through the introduction of additional treasury guarantees. Now, let's briefly look at Korea's story. Korea's annual per capita GNP was only US $80 in 1960. Capital was extremely scarce, with domestic savings equivalent to less than 2% of GNP in 1960 to 62, well below savings level in most other developing countries. Few observers held out hope at that time for Korea's poverty-stricken economy. The military coup d'etat of May 1961 was a major turning point in Korean economic history. Park Chung-hee, who led the coup, justified the coup in terms of the urgent need to rescue the nation from the brink of starvation, as well as to defend it from the communist threats. Park had a strong commitment to economic development. He created necessary institutions for rapid economic development swiftly. One of his first moves was to nationalize all the banks to control over the allocation of investable funds in the economy. In 1961, the Park regime established the Economic Planning Board to become the key pilot agency of industrial transformation. Through a series of 5-year economic plans, the state guided Korean companies to invest in sectors considered strategic for the national economic development, either in terms of creating self-reliance or to compete in the international economy. The state carried out necessary policy reforms conducive to rapid economic development and aimed to establish synergistic interactions between itself and the market. Under Park's rule, the Korean state always perceived itself as a mediating agent and facilitator for bringing about industrial change. Through arm twisting, subsidies, or public enterprises as the circumstances demanded. The state was careful to allocate scarce capital to industries that would generate the highest growth for the economy. It identified technology pathways and helped select firms enter and prosper in targeted industries. Through credit allocation at low market interest rates, research and development assistance, and temporary protection from domestic and foreign competition. South Korea's achievements since 1960s is absolutely stunning. Korea's economy has experienced one of the most rapid structural transformations that had ever occurred, and within a single generation. Korea has escaped the vicious circle of poverty. Here you can see changes in Korea's trade volume, GDP, and trade dependency rate. Today, the South Korean economy is the world leader in consumer electronics, mobile broadband, and smartphones, and it ranks #1 in the world in the 2015 Bloomberg Innovation Index. South Korea now enjoys being one of the most advanced countries in the world. Per capita GNP in South Korea reached almost US $35,000 in 2021. Now I will present you new lens for you to look at economic development of the two countries. Let me start with cohesion and consensus base. Cohesion and consensus lead to cooperative and cooperation, and cooperative behavior creates synergies that contribute to overall productivity. There must be sufficient national cohesion and consensus for a state to mobilize society for rapid economic development. Political instability creates uncertainty and diverts attention from economic development to non-productive issues. This makes it very difficult to formulate coherent developmental policies, and the uncertainty makes the private sector reluctant to invest. Under such circumstances, it would be almost impossible to pursue an effective development policy. When we compare the two countries in terms of cohesion and consensus building, we see that Korea has been in much better shape than Turkey in several respects. First, Korea had a much better income distribution at the beginning of its takeoff in the early 1960s, mainly because of the land reform carried out in 1948. The land reform virtually eliminated the landlord class, paving the way for a fairly open class structure. Successful land reform in Korea resulted in low levels of inequality and corruption. Second, Koreans have an unusual educational zeal. Heavy emphasis on education increased social upward mobility. Third, ethnically and culturally, Koreans are perhaps the most homogeneous people in the world, and they speak out the same language. The Turkish population, on the other hand, constitutes a mosaic, both in terms of ethnicity and religion. This undermines national cohesion and consensus building. Although education was high on the agenda in the Atatürk era, the result was much less successful compared to Korea. Therefore, the potential for social upward mobility has been lower. This meant fewer equal opportunities for the citizens. Turkey's income distribution has been much worse than Korea, as you have seen in the table 1. This is mainly because proper land reform couldn't be carried out in Turkey. Unequal income distribution made consensus building very difficult. Chronic conflicts arose in Turkey, particularly after the demise of the single-party political system in 1945. Widening income disparities fueled ideological conflicts in the country. This led to a weakening of cohesion in society and a decline in political stability. The heart of logic of the state is the principle of legitimacy, which holds the apparatus together, structures and organizes the codes and principles, and access to power and exercises it. Principles of legitimacy shape beliefs about who has the right to rule and whether those rules should be obeyed. The appropriate metrics of state legitimacy will endogenously change over time and place. Government trustworthiness and procedural justice are necessary conditions for legitimacy. It is much easier to build consensus in a society when the state rulers are legitimate. Then, improving well-being rather than power struggles becomes a priority, and available resources can be mobilized for economic development. If those in power are not recognized as legitimate and do not pursue legitimate policies, actions of the state are likely to meet with contempt or resistance from society and face outright opposition, which could lead to ineffective results. The state is the key actor in social transformation, and it can be a catalyst for speeding up capital accumulation and technological progress. However, it would be over-optimistic to expect a successful developmental outcome without a satisfactory level of state capacity. The state should have sufficient administrative capacity to make and execute economic decisions. In the absence of such state capacity, satisfactory outcomes may not be achieved even if the right policy is chosen haphazardly. Meritocratic civil service examinations were an extremely important factor in building state capacity in Korea. The existence of very rigorous entrance examinations, which attracted the country's best qualified individuals, reinforced the insulation of the bureaucracy, and it is claimed to speak on behalf of the national interest. That was hardly the case in Turkey. Unlike the Korean state, the Turkish state is known as a massive source of jobs filled on the basis of connection rather than merit. A less selective recruitment policy in Turkey compared to Korea created intense pressure on the state's capacity and may well have contributed to the erosion of state institutions. Moreover, organizationally consistent career ladders that connected people to corporate goals and enable them to gain the necessary experience to work effectively have never been well institutionalized in Turkey. Furthermore, as the Turkish state has not been immune to clientelistic pressures, it has generally experienced significant internal divisions and contradictory tendencies. Particularly since the 1970s, the internal divisions and contradictory tendencies of the Turkish state have undermined the administrative capacity of the state. Rather than settling for long-term gains through a series of promotions based on relevant organizational merits, Turkish bureaucrats have almost always faced hectic careers marked by the rhythms of the shifting political leadership and the periodic creation of new organizations. Every 3 or 4 years, the leadership restructured the agencies. Consequently, the internal coherence of Turkish state enterprises has generally been weak. In contrast to the Korean state, Turkey's state apparatus has lacked overall coherence and cohesiveness. Another important issue undermining state capacity is low salaries in the public sector. Bureaucrats have suffered severe losses in their real living standards in Turkey since the 1930s. As Rushmeyer and Evans put it, a state must acquire a certain degree of relative autonomy from the ruling class to effectively facilitate economic transformation. A certain autonomy is required not only to formulate common goals but also to implement them. In some societies where the national bourgeoisie and other capitalist classes are weak, the civilian and military bureaucracies can fill the power vacuum and significantly influence state policy. In this sense, these groups, their special interests and power struggles can be argued as determining factors. Keider emphasizes the important point that when a state has relative autonomy from individual capitalist interests, it becomes possible for the state authorities to pursue projects that go beyond the interest of a particular group. Evans suggests that a state's transformative capacity requires a combination of corporate coherence and external connectedness, which he calls embedded autonomy. This is an intriguing concept and makes sense in the Korean context. But the embedded autonomy concept is like a double-edged sword, and it may have detrimental effects on economic development in countries where there is no merit-based civil service employment and income distribution is very bad. Economic development depends not only on the availability of factors for production, but also on the motivation to act to obtain satisfactory results. Without sufficient incentives and requirements, citizens of a country would seldom strive for economic development, since it requires sacrifices from today and that may be hardly popular. I identify motivating factors for economic development as being tense geopolitics and external threats to independence, scarcity of natural resources and technology, equitable distribution of income and fairly shared welfare improvements, cohesion and consensus in the society, and national pride. Korea had more motivations for rapid economic development than Turkey, because it is surrounded by major international powers such as Russia, China, Japan, and the US. Moreover, it has technically been at war with North Korea since 1950s. This geopolitics obliged the country to achieve rapid economic development. I argue that the main reasons for the divergent developmental outcomes of Turkey and South Korea are very much related to their different levels of consensus building abilities, administrative capacity, state legitimacy, state autonomy, and economic development motivation. When the two countries are compared within the light of these criteria, it is evident that Korea's performance is generally better and improving. Turkey's performance, on the other hand, is far from satisfactory and seems to be deteriorating. Compared to the Korean state, it was hardly possible to apply support and discipline policies effectively in Turkey. Establishing a sound base for economic development in Turkey necessitates some fundamental changes. The key initial changes I propose are the institutionalization of merit-based civil service recruitment, the delivery of justice through the rule of law and equal opportunities for every citizen. It is also essential to make public procurement and other transactions transparent and accountable for public officials to build up trust in public authorities. These changes should be accompanied by a substantial reduction in inequalities in society. Thank you very much for that.
There's tea and coffees warm now if you want to get
Let's
just...
some discussion. We're gonna have a break, yeah? Or do you want a coffee now? Right. Would you like to have a coffee and then we have discussion?
No discussion.
Go on then, go on. Have your coffee. Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. Sasha will tell me, Sasha, everything that it has to be democratically accepted. All right. Mustafa has compared and contrasted South Korea to Turkey. As you all know, geographically they are different, but the political history of South Korea is very different to Turkey to some extent. One has emerged from after Japanese invasion or colonization and into a formidable country in the contemporary period. And since 1960s, as you mentioned, they have become remarkable in terms of what they have achieved. And then once you compare that to, and of course, he mentioned about the military. The role of the military is very important in South Korea, and the state. And I might be incorrect in here. South Korean model is quite, in some ways, similar to the Japanese model of development. The family unit is very important, both in terms of legitimizing development, but also in terms of growth and prosperity in South Korea. When you compare it to Turkey, in Turkey also, the military has played significant roles since 1920s. In fact, its role is still important, but it's conflicting area in politics in terms of what military wants to do and what the current AKP party wants to do. And that reflection of that is the current election in last May we had. So,
in South Korea, the US military's been very active.
I was going to come to that.
Oh, sorry.
So in both countries, the USA has played an important role. As you all know, since last week's lecture, US has got a military base in Turkey. But the significance of this military USA in South Korea, a lot of people argue, it has played a crucial role in terms of aid. Initially, they gave them a lot of aid to develop. But this aid has been given to many other countries and they haven't developed. So the question I think in here is the contrast and why Turkey, what Mustafa was arguing, it hasn't done as well as South Korea. What are the underlying causes? And he mentioned his reasons why there are problems in Turkish economy and there hasn't been as much. So what are those reasons? How did he explain those things? So let's have one or two questions, then Mustafa will come back to it. Have I explained that correctly? Okay.
Perfectly.
Yes, Yuan.
Sorry, a bit of echo, that's all.
Acoustics.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. It's done beautiful today. Yeah, sorry, I have a bit of a cold as well. Like, it's interesting you were saying like the geographical areas of both Korea and Turkey are so vast and different as well. It was interesting, like during the 50s and 60s, you had like the Asian tigers as